Welcome to our World Youth Day series of webinars. Today we are talking about Stateside Celebrations. I'm Alex Cranston, the production coordinator for the Catholic Apostolate Center. I'd like to welcome our host, Dr. Charlotte McCorquodale. Dr. McCorquodale is the president and CEO of Ministry Training Source, and we're pleased to have her hosting today's conversation. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please send a message in the chat box on the bottom right of the screen, and I'll be sure to help you out. Throughout the conversation, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please send them in the Q&A box, and if we have time, we will try our best to answer them. If you could also send in the chat box what role in ministry you have, that would be wonderful, so then we can know who we're talking to in regards to these stateside and digital celebrations. Now, without further ado, I would like to turn things over to Dr. McCorquodale to introduce today's panelists.
This exciting opportunity that we have with this World Youth Day. I guess because it's in January, the numbers of actual pilgrims that are going to Panama are down compared to other years. But the opportunity that we have here in the U.S. and because of digital technology to still engage and participate in this World Youth Day is really tremendous. And that's what we'll be talking about today. I'd like to introduce our panel today who's going to be sharing some insights with you on this topic. And I'll do it one by one and ask them just to say hello and tell you a little bit about themselves. Let's start with Jonathan. Jonathan Lewis, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Pastoral Ministry and Social Concerns in the Archdiocese of Washington in D.C. and Maryland. And I've served in this role and for the Archdiocese the last 6 years, including hosting my third stateside celebration of World Youth Day here in the Archdiocese of Washington in our work with young adults. I was also recently an auditor for the Synod on Young People, and so seeing these stateside celebrations as a way to continue to implement the Synod on Young People.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jonathan. We're looking forward to hearing from your experience. We're also happy to have with us today Father Frank from Catholic Apostolate Center. Father Frank?
Hi, I'm Father Frank Donio. I'm the director of Catholic Apostolate Center. And the center is very pleased to be able to collaborate on the different projects associated with World Youth Day, and especially with the USCCB and with Ministry Training Source. We're really enjoying this opportunity to collaborate on these webinars and also a number of other resources, and plus involved in a stateside event here in the Washington, D.C. area.
Great. Wonderful to have you, Father Frank. Father Frank also has been real instrumental in helping to write some of the guides that are part of World Youth Day resources, and so we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say about that, especially the preparation of pilgrims. And then finally, I guess we would call him our World Youth Day rock star, because he's been on every one of the webinars, Paul Jarzembowski. Paul?
It's a pleasure to be with you. So I work with the Bishops of the United States in advancing the work of World Youth Day and Youth and Young Adult Ministries. And happy to be here.
Well, it's going to be great to have you as a part of this as well. Paul today is especially going to be sharing a little bit with us about how young people can digitally participate in this World Youth Day, so we're looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's get started. So again, today we'll be talking about celebrating stateside and digitally. If any of you are joining this webinar that are actually going to Panama, and you actually have questions about that, we're going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, sending those questions to wyd@usccb.org. Today we really are going to be focusing on stateside and digital participation of young people in this World Youth Day. So let's begin in prayer. Father Frank?
And of the Son, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. God our Father, be with us on our pilgrim journey of faith. Give us the grace and courage to step forward in faith and hope on the road ahead. Open our eyes to see your face in all those we encounter. Open our ears to hear your voice in those who are often ignored. Open our hearts that we might be faithful disciples of mercy and truth. Transform us. Empower us to give of ourselves to the poor, to welcome the lost, to forgive those who hurt us, to comfort those who suffer and are marginalized. Bless those who travel from the United States of America to Panama to join the Universal Church for World Youth Day. Bless, too, those who celebrate Stateside, united in faith and joy. Like the disciples who journeyed up the mountain to witness the Transfiguration, may this experience be an encounter that strengthens us for our work in the world. Through the intercession of Mary, the Immaculate Conception, patroness of our nation, may we be worthy witnesses of our faith, humble representatives of our country, and inspired missionaries bringing peace, hope, and mercy into our communities. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Patron saints of World Youth Day, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Whole concept. I know you recently wrote a blog on this whole topic of encounter, accompany, live in community, and sin. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say about how we help prepare young people and young adults to be a part of both stateside events as well as the event in Panama.
Well, those four aspects of encounter, accompany, community, and send are really things that are the methodology of Jesus when it comes to how we deepen our encounter with him, how we're accompanied by him, how we come into the deeper community of faith in him, and how we are sent by him. So it's all rooted in Christ and the way in which he created the opportunity for us in and through our baptism, in which we're called to be to live our life as in mission and for him and for his church. Pope Francis calls this missionary discipleship, and it also can be called apostleship. This is a way in which we're all called to go forth. Because when we go on a pilgrimage, and I think that's the thing, when we look at World Youth Day, it's important for us to see it as a pilgrim opportunity, and we use that term throughout all of the different leadership guides and helping people to recognize that whether they go to Panama, come to some larger stateside event, or even if they connect digitally or do something locally, it still can be a pilgrimage, meaning that we're moving in faith from one point in our faith life to another, one that is less about ourselves and more about our going out, encountering Christ, and then going forth. So there's this aspect of encounter. Who are we encountering? We're encountering Jesus Christ, and we need to recognize that this is not simply our encounter of just simply ourselves, but instead we are encountering Christ in the other person, Christ in the Eucharist in a very particular way, in the real presence, Christ in Scripture, Christ in our moving in those moments of maybe suffering or challenge during our pilgrim experience, Christ in our service toward others, which we've heard kind of enumerated in the prayer that we had at the beginning. The World Youth Day prayer really speaks to that. How do we see Christ in these other people who might be lost or forgotten or in need in some way? Do we see Christ in them? And so World Youth Day provides all sorts of opportunities for us to encounter Christ. And the pilgrim leader is called to help pilgrims recognize that encounter, because sometimes we don't see it, and it needs to be recognized. And that's where accompanying comes in. The accompanying is that we are walking together. Now, it's not necessarily walking in front of, but walking together, more like the road to Emmaus, more how Jesus walked with those who then eventually, whose hearts were burning within them after the breaking of the bread. But that accompanying is not just simply a meandering around. Instead, it's a very focused accompanying into the events of World Youth Day, wherever they might be happening. But also meeting people where they are. Now that phrase, sometimes people might bristle at it and say, oh, well, what does that mean? It means that we take the opportunity, just as Jesus did on the road to Emmaus, to actually listen to the other person. Who are they? Where are they? And then to walk with them into that not only deeper encounter, but into living community. Because when we live community, we're living community together as pilgrims, but we're also living community as church. We're coming together with the Holy Father, no matter where we are, showing how we are united as a community of faith in all of our beautiful diversity. We are brought together as a community of faith that says we are together. And so therefore, as a leader, we're called to build that community, to really help the pilgrims live that community. Sometimes that community life, in fact, almost always, it requires some degree of sacrifice, some degree in which I recognize that I'm not the center of the universe, but I'm part of a much, much larger whole. And how many people on the World Youth Day experience have recognized that? My goodness, I'm in communion with the church, much, much larger than myself, in which we all believe, in which we're all united, particularly in the Eucharist. And then, from there, we're sent. We're sent out into the world, sent out to those who need our presence. We go forth from the experience. That's a little more challenging, because when we disperse as pilgrims, it shouldn't be just simply dispersing and then, well, I go back to just my everyday life. Interiorly recognizing that I have been sent by the Lord. I'm a follower, a disciple who has been sent on mission. And what is that mission? The mission of Christ and of his church, to bring others into that encounter, to accompany them, to help them live community, and then that they too can be sent as missionary disciples. So World Youth Day gives really an opportunity to intensify that experience.
Thank you, Father Frank. I mean, it's interesting to think about that. You can easily see how this applies in a pilgrimage setting to Panama, but for us to kind of understand that these same steps apply to stateside events, I think is really important as we move forward. It'll be interesting to kind of apply that as we think about that today. Paul, would you like to help folks who are planning for stateside events to know what resources they might have? And I just want to encourage things before Paul gets going. If in the chat you could introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about where you're from and what type of ministry you're involved in, a school ministry, parish, that would be really helpful to us. Paul?
Excellent. Well, thank you, Father Frank. In some respects, the formula, the process by which we engage in World Youth Day does apply. And so everything that Father Frank had outlined in a very quick way is actually, and you see it on the screen as well, is in the Pilgrimage Leader's Guide. So that's available through the Catholic Apostolate Center website, through the World Youth Day USA website. Both sites have this resource. It's free, it's downloadable, it's an ebook. There are many ways in which people can access it, but it's completely available to people so that you can have that. And then through both the Catholic Apostolate Center's website and the World Youth Day USA website, which is coordinated by the U.S. Bishops Conference, there are some tips, some ideas, some resources that are, we mentioned Father Frank had a blog. There's videos. There's one-page outlines of different things you can use the day of. And then the World Youth Day International website, which is panama2019.pa. And even if you're not going to Panama, there's a lot of great resources on that website to be able to allow you to be in solidarity with those pilgrims. So there's really, and if I could, really outline here, there are 4 ways in which you could potentially celebrate stateside. And we're going to kind of unpack a little bit of that. So the first way is linking up to an existing stateside event in your area. So there are, and we will, in a moment, you'll hear about, there's opportunities around the country where people have already begun planning some sort of local gathering simultaneous with the Panama gathering. So the first way is to find one of those locally and to go to it. So that's one way, is to go as a leader that leads other pilgrims to an existing program. The second thing is, for instance, if you look at the map of see where they're located, if they're not located near you, you can develop your own. And again, not to be, some of these events you may see, they're pretty large. It's not necessarily when we say develop a stateside event, it's not necessarily meant to say develop something that thousands and thousands of people can come to. No matter how big or small it is, do something. So if that means having a stateside event in your local community for 5 people, that's a stateside event. If it means 500 or 5,000 people, so be it too. No matter how big or small it is, developing something for the young people in your community would be a second thing you can do if such an existing stateside event doesn't exist in your area, or you also want to do something because you have available resources. Another way in which you can participate stateside is to help the young people in your community participate digitally. And this can apply for those who are going to a stateside event or developing their stateside event, because those events will take place in a given time, maybe on a Saturday or Sunday or for 3 hours one evening. But World Youth Day, the interesting thing about it is it's not a day, it's actually meant for a whole week. So there are opportunities to participate digitally from Monday through Sunday of the week that it's going on in Panama. So you can participate through social media, live streams, engage in dialogue online. There's a variety of ways to do this digitally. When you're not in community with somebody else, you can be in community with those who are participating online. And in some respects, you'll be in community with those who are participating online while they're in Panama as well. For instance, the U.S. Bishops Conference, and we will be having social media connections during that, so you can engage with us, with the bishops, with the pilgrims who are in Panama. You can have dialogue and conversation there and follow us as well. Or with one another. For instance, if you're a pilgrim or a young person, or you're a leader of a young person in Chicago, you can participate digitally with a young person in Washington, D.C., or in California, or wherever across the country, and form that digital community that way. And the fourth way to celebrate is so to help. Well, and I guess this would kind of go in with that, but to help pilgrims connect with other pilgrims online or stateside in other cities and countries, because not just the United States, but World Youth Day is meant for the world, and that's one of the things that John Paul's vision of this gathering, that Pope Benedict and Pope Francis have continued, is that this be a global celebration of young people, that it be a time where that young people around the entire world come together in a spirit of peace and fraternity and solidarity. And so there are young people who are in different countries who are participating simultaneously to what's going on in Panama, just like there are young people in the United States who will be doing this stateside.
So, Paul, it seems like most people will want to really connect around the World Youth Day events, the papal events. So maybe you could tell our listeners and the viewers a little bit about those events and the best times and best ways to connect.
Excellent. So one of the nice things this World Youth Day is we have a World Youth Day that is existing in the traditional U.S. time zones. So in January of 2019, Panama will be on the Eastern time zone. So all these times listed are Eastern time zone. So if you're already used to figuring out what time is it in my part of the country compared to the Eastern time zone, you would adjust these for your times as well. So on Thursday, the 24th of January, Pope Francis will kind of that will be his big introduction, his welcome to World Youth Day. That'll be starting at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. On Friday, 5:30 p.m., the Via Crucis. Pope Francis will lead young people in a Way of the Cross service. At 6:30 p.m. on Saturday, we'll begin an evening candlelight vigil, and that will last for a couple hours as well, where the Pope engages in adoration, in reflection, in prayer, in silence with the young people who are gathered there with him for the candlelight vigil. And then the closing Mass takes place on Sunday, the 27th, at 8 a.m. in the morning. That's when it begins, and it will last through the morning. So one thing that's different from past years is these times are a little bit earlier than World Youth Days in the last couple of cycles, but there's certainly something that to be able to link into. So as you develop something, for instance, if you're developing something or going to something or digitally participating, keeping aware of these times is going to be very helpful to be in solidarity with those who are in Panama.
Paul, can you remind me, it seems like in past World Youth Days, the Vatican has published rather quickly after Pope Francis and preceding popes spoke their remarks and their text. Where would be the best place we could look for that if someone wanted to kind of review that? And because, one way they could help young people to participate digitally is by sharing some of that with them,
Right. Well, I do believe that our collaborators with the Catholic Apostolate Center will probably have some of those resources when they are made available and post them on the website. And we also know that the Vatican Media, which you can access through Salt and Light TV or EWTN, are going to be available as well, so checking those sites out. But I know the Catholic Apostolate Center will have a number of those resources available when they become available to the public.
So here on the screen we see a variety of resources, both from World Youth Day USA, Catholic Apostolate Center, and then again the Salt and Light. And so now we're going to have Alex from the Apostolate Center tell you a little bit about the resources they have, and then share with us some of these websites so we can take a look at them. Thank you, Alex.
Of course. So you can see here on your screen right now is the blog post that Father Frank Donio, the director of the center, wrote in regards to this theme of encounter, accompany, live, community, and send. It's a great blog post. I highly recommend reading it. It was sent out to you all in the chat box, so you can go there and read it after we're done with the blog or with the webinar. Here you now see the website of the USCCB with the different information in regards to stateside celebrations. It lists here the local celebrations. You can see all the different ones that will be happening in the US. There's quite a few of them, which is great. You also see here at the bottom it says you can access the Stateside Leaders Manual, which is what we were just talking about, which gives a lot of information about how to prepare for your own stateside celebration and how you can be a leader in your own in your stateside. We have some social media links here from World Youth Day USA, both their Twitter and Facebook page. They'll be, Paul and his team will be in Panama covering World Youth Day as they're there with boots on the ground, but the Catholic Apostolate Center will also be working with the USCCB and Paul and his team to bring World Youth Day and the Holy Father's visit to Panama back stateside. So you can follow us and the USCCB and World Youth Day USA to make sure that you are still in the loop. Here is the Catholic Apostolate Center's World Youth Day portal. Now, this portal has a lot of information from the USCCB and from the Catholic Apostolate Center, from our own blog posts, our own resources. All of these webinars that we've been doing for the last few months are available on this portal, as well as the International Pilgrimage Guide and the Stateside Pilgrimage Guide, as we just saw on the USCCB website. It has a lot of information about what's going on and how to stay involved and be spiritually and physically prepared for World Youth Day. You see at the bottom here our patron saints of World Youth Day, as we saw at during the opening prayer. In addition, the Catholic Apostolate Center also has our website, Centro del Apostolado Católico, which is the Spanish language version of our website, and it's a website in and of itself. It is not a translation of our own, but it is dedicated to creating resources for Hispanic populations and persons who speak Spanish. So there's a lot of dedicated resources here for people from Latin America or from the US and Hispanic communities for World Youth Day. And then the last point was Sunlight TV. They have their live stream will be live with all the events of World Youth Day coming from Panama, as well as the events of the Holy Father while he's there. So you can access all of this and more by going to the Catholic Apostolate Center's website, which is just catholicapostlatecenter.org, and or wid2019.us, as well as you can go online to Centro del Apostolado Católico.org.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alex. And so the good news about all these resources is that you really can adapt them to your local situation. And we have a lot of different stateside celebrations. This, again, is just a link that you can see here to those two websites that Alex is just sharing with us. So you can see we have quite a number of stateside celebrations that I've already shared with the USCCB that they're going to be hosting these events. I want to encourage you to go to the World Youth Day USA website that you just saw posted there. You can find some real detail on each of these events, and we're about to share those with you. So it looks like if you're on the perimeter of the country, you're in good shape, but we really need someone in the middle of the country there to step up and do a stateside event. So if any of you that are on here actually are doing a website event, a stateside event rather, please feel free to, again, contact World Youth Day, WYD@usccb.org, and let them know about it, and they'll actually put that on their website for you. So let's take a look at these. Well, actually, no, we're going to do that in a moment. We're going to start, though, with one of the largest stateside events, and as Jonathan explained to you a moment ago, that this is something they've done now 3 times. Welcome, Jonathan, and we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about what you're doing and what you've learned along the way in this journey.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. So if folks want to follow along on our website, I would encourage you to go to wyddc.org if you want to sort of scroll through as I'm sharing a little bit about our event. So in Washington, D.C., we're hosting a stateside celebration called Panama in the Capital. This is our 3rd time in the Archdiocese of Washington co-hosting a stateside celebration of World Youth Day, beginning with Rio and then Krakow and now to Panama. And we've learned a lot in that process that I'd be happy to share if you have any questions. But I want to share a little bit about what goes into sort of our planning process. So we're blessed to have a number of dioceses and national organizations and institutions here in the DC area. So the first thing we've identified is who's our audience, and really wanting to build an event for the core audience that we serve, which in the city of Washington is a lot of young adults and young professionals. And so we have an event for college-age students and young adults that we made the decision, which is one I would encourage you to reflect on, whether to include youth or young adults or both. We made the decision to just do something for young adults, to do something a bit more age-appropriate. Also clears us of child protection questions, managing an event for adults, not for young people. The second is sort of who are the national partners. And so you see the Catholic Apostolate Center hosting this webinar. We're very lucky to have them down the street in the Archdiocese of Washington, and so same with the USCCB. And so we've worked with some neighboring organizations and dioceses. We have four total dioceses co-hosting this. And so one of the questions we asked is, who can we join arms with? We could certainly do something ourselves, but we could probably do something better with other people bringing their gifts and expertise to the conversation. But we've also tried to, be good stewards of our time and resources by utilizing the institutions that we already have. And so instead of renting a big facility or doing some big event somewhere, we're utilizing the space we have on campus of the Catholic University of America in DC. And they've been a great co-hosting partner with us, which means we've had to adapt a little bit. We don't have one big conference center or something like that. We're rather treating it, as you can kind of see from the flyer, with more of a music festival feel. So we will have, after registration for our one-day event, we'll have 7 concurrent stages with live music and speakers that young adults can choose from, recognizing that young adults kind of want to float and choose their own adventure, kind of like the old Goosebumps books, to decide what talk or musician inspires them or speaks to where they're at, which allows us to reach a wider population of married couples and college students, of Spanish speakers and English speakers. And one other blessing that we've been able to have is just to really include young adult leadership. I myself am a young adult as the chair of the core team, but almost all the people on our core team are people in their 20s and 30s, young adults have seats at the table and making decisions. And so I think that's been a key role, is listening to the perspectives of young adults, but also of younger college students as well, to make sure that we're resonating across a spectrum of our audience. In terms of the theme for the day, you can see some of the features there. We've got live music, speakers. We've really tried to bring Panama to the capital of our country in D.C. So we'll have Panamanian caterers providing food for the event. We're going to have Panamanian coffee, try to get some Panamanian beer for the event, which would be kind of fun if we could do that. We have a 30-minute performance by Panamanian dancers. And so we have some access to that in an international city like Washington, but there's always ways to build in that style of the event. So we're going to buy a bunch of Panamanian flags and just really sort of trying to bring that culture there as well. And at the end of the day, one of our goals is to recognize that two things. One, that World Youth Day is a privileged experience to encounter Christ, because God always communicates faith throughout the history of the church through our culture. And so by highlighting different cultures across the world, Krakow last time, Panama this time, we get a different and unique snapshot of the universal church that's a benefit to our faith. And so we want to highlight that culture. But we also want to make that accessible to people who may not have a week's vacation and $2,000 to travel abroad. And so we intentionally have made our event only $20 so that almost anyone can participate, regardless of their ability to take time off or their ability to travel internationally, to really reach out to people across various ages and stages of faith and ability, to highlight persons with developmental differences, to really have multicultural speakers and musicians to represent the face of the church.
Wonderful. Jonathan, how many folks do you anticipate being involved?
We've been typical for Stateside Celebrations. Last time, about 30 days before our event, I was sharing this earlier, we had 60 people registered 30 days before. We ended up with 1,300 2 years ago. So we're expecting, 1,000 to 2,000 people. We're at Catholic University, so we certainly expect a lot of college students to probably make up their mind 10 minutes before the event starts. But in general, we'll be a couple thousand people.
All right, awesome. Well, that sounds great, to bring in Panamanian culture. D.C. already has traffic, so in that way, it's very much like Panama.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take a look at some of the other events that are going on. Paul, you want to share with us a little bit about what you've heard that's going to be happening around the country?
Sure. And this, again, this is what we have been communicated. So there may be other programs that we're not aware of. If you know of others, please shout out. But what we do know, first, is the Panama, the capital, in D.C. We know in Fort Wayne, South Bend, that there'll be a diocesan youth conference going on in February that corresponds to this. In Seattle, a two-day event is happening in the Archdiocese of Seattle. In Galveston, Houston, we've got an overnight vigil and gathering. In Sacramento, California, 2 days as well. And then Stockton, California, they're doing a California stateside, Stockton stateside celebration. So depends on some of these are for youth, some are for young adults, some are for both. You'll have to look at specifically on the website for those exact details. Fresno, Brownsville, Texas, Philadelphia, and St. Augustine, Florida are some other examples.
Seems like there's a lot of positive energy going on about this. I think this is the largest number I've seen for stateside. Would you say that's the case?
Well, I think we're going to see more people participating stateside, and I think this is the largest number we've had this far before World Youth Day. So I'm anticipating all the people on this call to get so excited and send us information about their 5, 10, 50-person gathering as well, and we'll populate that even further. But yeah, already we've got a lot. And as you noted before, we have a lot around the coast, so we certainly would love to have more people engage this in the middle of the country. Alaska, Hawaii, we would certainly love for stateside celebrations to take place all over our country.
So, Paul, these are all more of these large gathered events. It looks like mostly dioceses are sponsoring them. But what are some of the other types of events, that you envision or that you've heard people are doing maybe in their parishes and or schools?
So sometimes there are some gatherings where you'll have like a theology on tap. People will take a theology on tap at that time of year and do 3 weeks leading up to it. So they'll have like several 2 or 3 hour gatherings in the evening leading up to it, either weeks or days. Some parishes gather people together after Mass on the Saturday Mass. They gather all the young people together after like their vigil Mass to maybe watch things on television and gather them for food and fellowship. So there's a variety of different things. So some religious communities have opened up their houses of formation. Convents, seminaries have opened up their doors for people to come in. And again, a lot of times, just like Jonathan had described, there's going to be food involved. There's going to be some cultural elements involved, and certainly spirituality. And how all that mixes together is dependent on each audience.
That's excellent. Father Frank, when you think about how parishes might participate, do you have any thoughts about that in parishes and or schools, some of those local kind of events?
Well, I think especially that there's so many digital ways and also to connect in. There's the live streams, just to get a group of people together, to come together in prayer, in fellowship, in Mass. Even if it means moving, having a walking pilgrimage during a portion of that day, or going and doing some type of charitable service for another, and go forth and do that kind of a work of mercy that can be then brought into the pilgrim experience. But especially to be able to encounter Christ in those moments with one another, particularly if possible in the Eucharist, but to connect with what's going on in Panama. A number of these stateside events, I'm sure, will also have some a connection also with some live streams, so there might be some speakers that people can connect with who are in these different places and different venues. But also then, who are some of the local people? Who are some of the local people who can provide that catechetical formative moment in which the group can really break open what it means to be a Catholic, and how do I live that in my everyday life, and how am I sent forth, and then also ascending forth from that moment. So it could be a kind of combined mix of things that a local group could be doing as an event, and it doesn't have to be a huge number of people. It could be just a smaller group of people coming together and experiencing together in a communal way.
Especially being connected to the Holy Father and to the Universal Church in that way. There's just such an opportunity, as Jonathan was speaking, that he highlighted, that connection that we feel. And so I think that's really wonderful. So any other thoughts, gentlemen, on what makes a successful statewide event? I've kind of heard Jonathan say, making sure you understand your audience and maybe naming your audience. Not that you can't do it for youth and young adults, but you have different limitations, and sometimes it's hard to hit the middle. Well, you can hit the middle and you leave off the ends when you do those kind of events. So audience is important. I heard connection to the Panamanian culture and highlighting that would be another successful aspect of it. I heard collaboration. Is there anything else that you think of that, besides those things, that would help make a successful event?
I would say one of the things we want to make sure is that no matter how big or small the event is, that every person who participates feel that World Youth Day is meant for them. I think that we don't want anyone who's at home to feel like they're second class, that World Youth Day is for someone else and that they watch other people engaging in that, but that every single young person in the United States, and in fact all across the world, should be engaged in some sort of deepening of faith, whether it's a pilgrimage, a moment of encounter, a community, a notion of sending and service, but that every young person in that last week of January across the whole world should feel a part of this. And whatever, I think a successful stateside, and I think even the word event can be misleading, because we often think event, we see the picture that's pictured there with everyone like, huge crowds. But a successful stateside moment is really one that makes every young person feel like they belong to the universal church, and that this is a time where the Holy Father and the whole world is celebrating them. And as long as that can happen, whether that's with 5 people or 500 or 5,000, I don't think size matters. I think what matters is that they feel a part of that community, that family.
Yeah, actually, we might have as many people celebrating stateside this year, at least, as we do, maybe even more so than actually in Panama itself. And good news, we have the Diocese of Honolulu. So if anybody that's interested in making a pilgrimage to Honolulu, Lisa Gomes just shared with us in the chat that they're having a stateside celebration as well. So that's really great news. If I wasn't going to Panama, I think I would go there.
I think so, yeah.
We've been talking about this whole digital connection, Paul. So maybe just share a little bit with us about what would some intentionality of connecting Panama pilgrims with USA pilgrims, and then the next slide, I'll just let you know where we're going, is about being a digital pilgrim. So maybe talking about those two things a little bit for us. I know we've highlighted a little bit, but maybe a little bit more detail.
And I think that's how it connects. I mean, we are blessed to live in a digital age in the sense that we have the ability, like no generation before us, to be able to instantaneously engage with people on the other side of the globe. And so through digital means, the pilgrims who are going to Panama should also be aware that they walk with those others. So first is in the preparation. I mean, there's only a few more weeks to go before we leave for Panama for those who are going, but in some preparation to be able to connect them with those who are maybe stateside, whether that's other families or other young people. They could do it during the event itself. One way that they could connect is that you could get, like, if a parish or a diocese or an area is sending, let's just say, like 10 pilgrims to Panama, but there's going to be like 50 young people staying back home in their parish or diocese, is there a way for them to communicate? Could they do like a Facebook Live from one from the other? And I think the other thing, too, is not to think that the Panama pilgrims, all they're in the role of is just teaching the U.S. pilgrims what's going on with them, but the U.S. pilgrims can share with those who are in Panama what exciting things are happening locally. And that can happen very digitally through conversations, through video chats, through whatever means you have available. But there are ways to connect the two. If, for instance, a bishop is going that from your diocese, consider working ahead of time with them and making sure that bishop is talking to the pilgrims back at home, in addition to the pilgrims who are right there in front of him. So there's a couple of ways to do that. And then after World Youth Day, finding occasions for the stateside pilgrims and the Panama pilgrims to meet together and to share their mutual experience. I think in the after experience of World Youth Day, the sharing of the stories, and again, honoring the story of the stateside pilgrim just as much as the story as the one who was in Panama City. What was that experience like? Where did you encounter Christ? Where did you feel that sense of community? How do you feel sent? The advantage of a stateside pilgrim over a Panama pilgrim is that the stateside pilgrim can get really into the sending part of their journey a lot quicker than the Panamanian. They got to still get on a plane and get back and unpack. The stateside pilgrim can already hit the ground running and then share that afterwards with the Panama pilgrims. And then digitally, we are asking people to follow along, to hashtag WIDUSA Panama 2019, to engage in a digital dialogue on social media, make it a community with those in Panama, with those not in Panama, and kind of see this global community forming in a digital way.
Really, hashtags are a great way to do that. And so this is the social media sites that World Youth Day USA will be using, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So depending on your audience, Paul, is there someone coming from the conference that's going to be sending information back via these sites? Absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to have a couple of folks. So we've got a social media team from the U.S. Bishops Conference, as well as our own social media team that's going to be working on posts and engaging the audiences on both areas.
All right, wonderful. And there's, in addition to World Youth Day, in addition to these two hashtags, World Youth Day USA and Panama 2019, you also have one other hashtag that the USCCB social media team is promoting.
Well, and actually, this is a global initiative. The hashtag MyWYD really is, and I think you'll be also in contact with people who are preparing for World Youth Day prior to going there. So now, whether you're preparing for a stateside celebration or preparing to go to Panama, to say to people, here's how I'm preparing, hashtag MyWYD, so that you can be in conversation. And then you can hear, when you click on that hashtag, also hear how people in other continents are preparing for World Youth Day as well, and to kind of learn from each other and go, hey, that's a good idea. I never thought about preparing that way. And again, preparation for both stateside and Panama bound.
Okay, great. Well, we're actually towards the end of our time together. We really don't have a whole lot of questions yet. Sister Therese is asking a little bit about, she's actually taken a group there. So again, Sister Therese, WYD@usccb.org after your orientation, that you can go there. I don't know about your question about performers, about who's performing, but again, if you'll just send those that way, that would be great. Does anybody have any specific?
I could just make comments. This would apply to those who are celebrating stateside. Is there will be performers and Catholic artists and musicians who will be there in Panama. Who, there will be some things that will be transmitted back so people could experience that as well. So there will be a number of artists on stage, on the main stage and the festival stages. And the Panama 2019 will send out information on that. We will send out information, especially if they're artists from the United States. So there will be a number, so we will be getting that information out as we learn it. Some artists are still confirming their appearance, but we do know that there'll be a number of relatively well-known Catholic artists. But I also know that Washington, D.C. has got some great artists that will be there in Washington. And so actually, the question I have for Jonathan on this is actually, Jonathan, is there a digital component to your event as well? Or is it basically those who are there on site would be able to see that?
We're still figuring out our capacity to do Facebook Live for some of the talks. We're trying to record all of them, given that we have 7 different locations. So in part, there'll be a digital connection through Tagboard and social media of just connecting all 7 stages at the various sites for our celebration. But I think one follow-up from this for me is I'd love to talk to Lisa in Hawaii and Gabrielle in Houston and other folks just about how we could share the images and the storytelling of each of our stateside events, depending on what days of the week that's happening, concurrent with World Youth Day, in addition to, Paul, as you said, the international experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we need a special hashtag, although I think we already have 3. That's probably enough. But for stateside events as well. Maybe stateside events can use World Youth Day USA, especially as a way to connect there. And it looks like Hawaii is also sending people live, so they're also already making a plan to connect those. And I think that's really the critical thing here. And even if you, I think as ministry leaders, it really is our job, I think, in those days to be paying attention to what's going on in World Youth Day and make sure we're pushing out through our own social media venues information about what's happening around the country and around the world relative to this. So I'm not saying
we do have one question, Charlotte, about best practices for creating community between international pilgrims and stateside pilgrims, and how they can be a community together and not just within their own respective groups that are staying at home or that are going abroad.
That's a great question. And not to just belabor the point, but the guide that that you can find on the Catholic Apostolate Center and the World Youth Day's website, there actually is a sample guide as to what to do after World Youth Day to form that community, including questions to ask, like small group questions, as well as like, this is a prayer service you could use to develop. So that's actually in the guide. The last part of the Stateside Leaders Guide is actually a part that explains ideas after World Youth Day to form that community. So there's a how-to, and again, these things are not written in stone, so you could take this, adapt it to your circumstances. But I would certainly suggest that anyone doing stateside, anyone doing the international thing, that in the weeks or months following it, that some sort of follow-up be done. Because again, that goes to that fourth component that Father Frank mentioned, that sending component. How are we accompanying people as they're being sent into that next stage? And so having follow-up gatherings or follow-up communications, whether that's digital or live, will certainly, but there's a sample version of that in here.
I'd love to add on that, Charlotte, if that's all right.
Please. Sure.
I think one of the dangers of hosting big celebrations or even in traveling internationally is it just takes so much darn work.
Yeah.
So many details and planning and meetings go into the one event that what Paul's talking about, what Father Frank said about really focusing on being sent back into a local community is really essential. And so, as we're game planning even in these last, couple months, what we're going to do to celebrate World Youth Day, I think it's important to think, do we have something on our calendar beyond just that week? Because I know that's a temptation. So, for example, in Washington, our strategy is we really want to use World Youth Day stateside celebration to be an evangelical outreach to folks who may not be as engaged in our regular parish young adult ministries by hosting this sort of larger scale event to draw people in. And then following for the semester in the spring, we're going to host 20 different local or regional small groups for young adults. And so we're going to use, capturing people's information and to follow back up with them to invite them into a smaller community where they can be known and just continue to discern how God's calling them in their daily life. So that's going to be our effort, but I would just encourage anyone planning that to really be intentional and have that as a part of the conversation, as well as our digital media is great, but if we're just turning into the Catholic Twitter that talks to the same 12 people, it doesn't really matter if I share a picture of what's happening in Houston if it's the same Catholic nerds who see everything. And Catholic nerds are great. I'm one of them, but that's not the goal, right? And so how are we using digital media in new and creative ways to go to the peripheries, to find partners or collaborators who can share content who are able to reach different groups than the ones that we already do. Otherwise, we're just jumping on the same footprint that we already have, and eventually we just wear people down. So that's another thing that we probably haven't spent as much time in DC on as we wanted to, but certainly I'm taking away from this conversation.
So, when you're thinking about using social media to connect Panamanian people going to pilgrims to stateside pilgrims, some strategies you might think about. I mean, I'm a part of some different Twitter chat feeds that happen on a weekly basis as part of my work in e-learning. And one of the things the strategies that they use that is really great is they, in advance, come up with some questions that we'll be talking about, and they pick a specific time and a specific hashtag to be able to have that chat. And so, as you're thinking about strategically, when would be some times on the World Youth Day schedule and in a live event where you might have a common question? And even the question that we saw a moment ago, I think it was on this last slide, about how are you preparing for World Youth Day, to use some social media like this in terms of inviting people to respond to something, instead of just saying, send us pictures of the papal welcome, but maybe asking a question relative either to the message that day or to the event that day, for example, when the Pope leads us in the way of the cross. All right, is there any other questions, Alex, that I missed as we're looking at this?
I don't believe so.
All right, great. So I think we're coming to the end of our time together. I'm going to talk in a moment a little bit about the next webinar, but I just want to prep the panel. I'm going to invite each of you to give a last comment, just kind of a summary comment, similar to what you've been doing, Jonathan, in terms of what's your takeaway or what's one message you might have for folks as they prepare to celebrate stateside. Our next webinar will be January 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It'll be a webinar to give some final updates and preparation for World Youth Day Panama, as well as stateside celebrations. I anticipate that there will have an additional list of stateside celebrations and any additional information that might help with stateside celebrations. So please join us for that. We'll also be focusing as well at that webinar on World Youth Day Panama and any updates that we have for those traveling to Panama and participating in that event. So, as you think about this panel, what's the takeaway that you have, or one thing that you really want to give as a final thought? Would one of you like to go first, or do you want me to pick on somebody? All right. I'll pick on you then. Paul?
All right. One of the things that I've been in my preparations for this in an international level is stateside or more or less, stateside is how we say it in the U.S., but these local gatherings seem to have caught the attention of people globally. Pope Francis, the Archbishop of Panama, is well aware of these gatherings. They know they exist, so if you're wondering if this is in a vacuum, it's not. I have heard that those on the international level are aware of them, and they are they're preparing to engage them. So I've received a lot of communications from Panama recently acknowledging the fact that there are people celebrating in multiple ways. I think this is a new reality that because of our digital age, I think people have a growing awareness of. So I think that whether you're going to do it with 5 or 5,000, you're a part of this, and I think people they're planning for you to be a part of it. So I think that's very exciting, and I think we're in a new stage of this World Youth Day journey that started 30-some years ago. I think it's another phase of it, of really involving the global world in a very serious way.
All right, thank you, Paul. Jonathan?
I would just echo what I had said earlier, that I think one takeaway for me is, while we're putting a lot of energy and have a lot of partnerships and in terms of our collaboration to host this event, that in these last, what I think is like 45 days or so before our World Youth Day celebration in DC, for me to be thinking about who are folks in the peripheries that we haven't traditionally reached out to or don't traditionally reach. So for example, we're having a stage in Spanish. We need to spend a little more time reaching out to our Spanish-speaking young adults in the Archdiocese and across the region, to reach out to those who have developmental differences so they can participate fully in the event, and probably do some paid advertising just to see how we can reach out to folks who aren't normally engaged in our communications.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Father Frank will give you the last word.
I think one of the ways is to just recognize that it doesn't have to be some huge event. Sometimes we get very number conscious, and while those are good things and important ones, that if people want to have a local gathering, that even where 2 or 3 are gathered, Christ is present. And so there is that opportunity, and particularly if you can get us out of our phones, and even if it's something digital that we're experiencing, maybe we can experience it together and have that opportunity to build and to live a community more, and to recognize again that we're part of a much, much larger whole, and that we're not alone, that we are united with Christ and with the Vicar of Christ in this World Youth Day experience.
Well said. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your experience and insights with us today. I'll turn it back over to Alex, and I look forward to being with all of you again on January 8th. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
Thank you so
Alex?
much, Charlotte. And thank you to all of our panelists for presenting, and thank you for everyone who tuned in and joined us this afternoon. We'll have a recording of this webinar uploaded to our website and our YouTube channel in the next week. So please keep an eye out there, and on our website, CatholicApostolatecenter.org, WID2019.us, and usccb.org/WID. You're welcome to share with anyone and with everyone who is interested in World Youth Day, especially the stateside celebrations. If you haven't yet found us on social media or World Youth Day USA on social media, please do so. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and our hope is that we can continue to reach more people and spread the message of the gospel through World Youth Day. And if you have any questions about World Youth Day, especially these stateside celebrations, please remember to send them to wyd@usccb.org. We'll see you on January 8th for the next webinar. And in the words of St. Vincent Pallotti, may the charity of Christ urge you on. Good afternoon and God bless.